Greetings, everyone. Welcome to my sketchbook. It is Monday. It is a fun week ahead, I hope, for most of you. Hopefully some adventures and some artsy things, too. Well, this is going to be an unusual drawing, maybe, possibly. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm going to zoom in here. So here's the concept. What do we know about soup? Well, as per usual with any time I sit down, I very rarely will look up things, but I'm just going to ramble on a little bit about what makes soup interesting to someone like me, maybe to some other people as well. It's kind of funny, in my head, I don't really think of soup as being a big deal. And maybe it's because growing up, I think I ate a lot of like stew. So, kind of soup, right? But it's kind of fun to think about what makes certain things what it is. And yeah, well, how about this, concept wise? If we look back in time and we see uh, some of the benefits of what soup is, well, maybe you could have, like, if you had meats that were very tough, it probably was a great way to soften whatever that meat would be. Other benefits, I suppose, with cooking things in general would have to do with, well, some things were not super well preserved. And those little greeblies, way back then that they wouldn't have seen, the microscopic things, the, terrible little bacteria, or let's just call them wormy creatures. Well, I think they had an understanding well enough that some of those things, as living creatures, couldn't survive being boiled. So maybe, maybe cooking food got rid of those other little living things, like parasites. Uh, you would let things cool down, of course, but maybe they knew the benefit of boiling things for that. Is that possible? Maybe, right? Certain building blocks, the stuff that we now know as being nutrients, are not fully lost in the boiling process, but I do think that there's a benefit to cooking some foods, combining. There's a chemical reaction of sorts that you do with the cooking of food, more so with fire than with boiling of things. Flavors combine a little bit better. I trust that soup in the cooking process of things, like getting a giant uh, cauldron or bowl or whatnot. There must have been something that was like comforting about warm food. Maybe. Some places, uh, having a bowl of soup is like a very natural, normal thing. It is a true comfort food. Helps to warm you up on the inside. Kind of gives you one of those abilities to chat. It's kind of fun to think about that for some reason. can kind of remember being a kid talking about uh, cereal being a type of soup. Now, that was long before I knew about the existence of something called gazpacho, which is a soup that's served cold. But I assumed in my little head that soup generally is warm. And, well, it's a combination of things. So, yeah. Hey, you know what would have been interesting in regards to soup? Wow. I think something that would be kind of interesting anyway is if you could find some noodles. How many of you have had like chicken noodle soup and you felt better because of it? Or you've had uh, chili because that seemed like super fun adventure type food. You know, you could have like corn chips with it, maybe some sour cream. It's very interesting though. Soup. Weather's been cold as of late where I am. So I'm holding that lid in my hand. It's a funny habit that I've, sort of developed. I could just set this aside, but since my left hand isn't really doing anything, often on the other side, outside of the view of the camera, I'm just sort of like holding down my sketchbook, and sometimes I'm just kind of like moving that thing around. A few days ago, I sent a message to this fellow I know, Paul, and I said, "Hey, what would be something fun to draw?" And he sent back a picture, and I thought, well, "That's awesome." Well, you know what? I don't really get to eat soup too often myself. As a kid, I've had lots of boiled things: boiled fish, boiled potatoes. Um, I don't always get to eat soup. It's funny, when I first started drawing this, I was thinking it would be kind of funny to have this person kind of blowing a little bit. So I was going to do the cheeks a little bit wider, but I didn't really do that very well. And this sort of, I like to call this a lumberjack grip on a spoon. You know, it's nice if you can hold things dainty with your pinky up. But sometimes if you have a hearty stew, you might eat your wonderful soup in this way. Let's roll up some sleeves here. So I grew up around a farm. My grandfather had lots of creatures around, but it was more of a place where you would grow crops, I suppose. So it did exist, like other animals and stuff on the farm did exist. And of course, we grew up around like other farmers. And there was a piggery just up the road, so you'd have swine. And yeah, that's kind of fun to think about. Let's put kind of a toque on here. A little pom-pom. The hat's kind of falling off, you see. It was a fun day of just working outside. It could be chilly in the house a little bit too. And what's kind of interesting about growing up the way that I did was that there was lots of work to be done. Scrabble was one of those super fun things. But food, though, that was kind of like an important thing. And when it's cold, oh, a warm meal is just phenomenal. Now, the way I did that arm there would make more sense if the shoulder came out a little bit here. And that way I could have a bit more sway with the placement of that arm. Of course, you probably know this. I'm just doodling here. So this isn't anything too serious. Just an opportunity to ramble on a little bit about stuff. For those of you who comment on videos, feel free to let me know what your favorite kind of soup is. What's something fun? It could be a comfort food like thing for you. You know, do you like noodles? So there's an Acadian influence on a lot of stews that you might have. And the Acadians contributed a lot to the concepts of using as much as you can. I mean, there's a lot of, other groups that have done the same. But like a dumpling, for me, that was a big deal to get some dumplings in your stew. So basically kind of like a dough ball of, it could be a salted dough ball. Maybe a little bit of garlic powder in it just for zing pow. What's sad here is you can't really see the thumb really tucked in there. And I think that would make that look a little bit different. And I think this is kind of throwing that whole thing off, that shoulder. So let's add some stripes in here. Now, how many of you, well, let's have so much excitement that you didn't really get your coat taken off. Over here we'd have the hood. Oh, and by the way, there was sort of a trend that kind of was around on the internet a little while ago where people were saying that if you have a hood on your coat that has uh, fur uh, trim or around, or like fur trim around it, I should say, that you would tuck in this fur trim on the hood. Yeah, don't do that. I don't know why someone started that. That's almost ridiculous. The whole concept of having fur on the outside was to kind of insulate the air around your face a little bit. So yeah, that fur. Anyway, I don't even really want to ramble on too much about that. Some people call that a microclimate, but the concept again is to keep the air in front of your face kind of warm, like it kind of traps it in a way. So if another way to look at how that works, it's not just pure thermodynamics. Consider this: on a very windy day, if someone's using a microphone outside, they actually would use a very furry or fuzzy microphone, and having all those little tiny strands actually kind of captures air and almost in a way increases surface area, and in another way it actually creates insulation. So it's not like having a flat thing with air going against it. Having all those little tiny strands creates more surface area and traps air. So if you have fur that surrounds the hood of your coat, it does that. It takes that air and kind of traps it in there. And that's from like thousands of years of of human beings just observing and seeing how animals do things. For example, uh, a polar bear has fur on the outside of its body. Why would they want to tuck that hair in? I get a kick out of that stuff. So there was a trend on social media of having people turn in the inside of their hood. Humans, they're funny. So over here, so what I'm thinking of right now is, could I actually sit like this without blowing out my knees? Uh, Possibly not. Maybe. I don't know. It's kind of funny. It's a weird thing to think about this kind of stuff. Now, what would I do with this one here? Well, let's have this leg kind of stretched out a little bit here. And that boot didn't even get kicked off. Whereas that one I'll have like the boot a little more off to one side maybe. We'll make it a kind of a wintry boot with a thicker sole. So in the northern part of Canada, it's a group of people that have been there long before the existence of Canada, long before the existence of the United States. And they lived in a place, or they still live in a place, where it can be miserable, cold. And human beings are remarkable because they've lived there long before insulation, long before the possibility of, well, they would have had possible use of fire at some point, but the frozen tundra would not give you lots of opportunity for wood. So, how do you survive? Humans need heat. Well, innovations that they made, adaptability, I suppose, the use of fur, the use of sort of like heat collection. It's kind of a craftiness to the Inuit people. And I love the artwork too. Now, let's see here. We're going to give it a definite heel and a definite toe with these socks. And a little bit earlier, I talked about soup. I mean, we have someone here eating some soup, of course. Sometimes the way that you would get your soup, at least for me anyway, you'd get a big bowl, and if it was too hot, you'd have to sit for a moment. And I did talk about, blowing a little bit of air on that, increasing the surface area, all those things to be able to eat your soup. I have to imagine that some of the first restaurants that were in use, let's say for travelers on the side of the road, when they were out, let's say, having great adventures or whatnot. Taverns, they would have been, let's say, somebody that was like kind of known as being a pretty decent cook, and this was a service that they could provide to travelers. And I bet you stew, so let's say it would be like venison, so deer or something like that, which can be a pretty tough sort of meat. Well, much like roasting something, stew softens, and I know I mentioned that. Uh, but you could throw in like potatoes, potatoes. I'm not going to quote Samwise, but anyway, yeah, you can peel them and chop them up and do all kinds of things with them. Put them in a stew. I think I'm going to have the boot standing up somewhere, maybe beside our friend here. One of the fun things about doing things or drawing with just ink is the fun little mistakes that you can make and that you have to try to live with. And I think that's awesome. Let's have the boot stand up, as I said, perhaps beside us here. And then one of the tricks, of course, is that I will kind of hide some of the boot behind the leg, so I don't have to draw too much of the boot. And it is going to have some treads. Here for the arch of the foot. Going here, it'll be a gosseted boot, which means that the tongue will have an extension of sorts that meets up with the boot itself, so that if it was open all the way down to here, well, snow would get in there. So basically a tall boot. Then on the back of the boot would have a pull tab. Not all of them do, but some of them do. They're quite handy. So Paul, let me know what you think. If this is a suitable drawing of soup. I'm going to back this out just a little bit, just to do a tiny little bit more work. Let's go this way. We're at almost 30 minutes with this doodle that's not perfectly out of hand, but no real plan. I do feel that the next drawing will probably be something kind of fantasy related, maybe. And maybe it'd be one of those things that I try to watch the time on and do it over, like, a few videos rather than just make, a super long video. But the length of time it takes me to do something is the exact amount of time the video length is. So I don't edit my videos for time like that. Just in my shorts, I suppose, when I make a short version of the video. A snippet, which I do with some of them. So yeah, if you want to hear me rambling on about anything in particular, because I don't know lots about lots of things, but I do like to ramble on about stuff, and if I don't know, I'll just say I don't know anything about that. Which I'm always fine to do, always fine to say. I don't know what else this needs. You know, I do like to trick the eye a little bit. Here I have my good friend, the bunny pen. Now, traditionally, I do just like black and white ink, but it's fun once in a while to add just a smidge of color to things. So, let's go with a little bit of green on this coat. And really, the only ones that'll know that I'm doing this would be you folks. A little bit of green on the outside here. And I do this because depending on what's going on, how close or how far away you are from something, your brain will fill in some of the gaps a little bit, depending on, whether or not you're colorblind or not, I guess, too. Anyway, so there, a little bit more here just for fun, a little bit on the inside of the fur trimmed hood, a little bit over here. I don't really want to add a lot of color to that. Let's go with some blue. Got a little bit of ink from the way I hold the pen. And red. Let's go with some red and some blue. So this is some red here. A little bit. My grandmother used to make us mittens and sweaters. And that was always a wonderful thing. Because those were things that she kind of started probably towards the end of summer, just about, back to school time. But she did that almost as if she knew the fall was coming and that we were going to need some warm clothes. And what a wonderful lady to do that. Blue. Now, I'm just going to put in a little tiny bit of blue here, just on the upper part of those red bands, because I'm not going to fill in the entirety of that shirt, or sweater, I should say. No need. For these snow pants, same kind of thing, just around the outside. We're at 34 minutes roughly right now. I don't know if I need to go really any further than this. I think concept-wise, that was really it. Just going to rosy the edges of the cheek, just a little bit on our friend here. A little bit on the nose too. Perhaps a little bit more. You have to dress for it. I think that's going to be it, folks. Thanks for hanging out. I know that's been a little bit of time. We could do, what do you think, Bunny? How about this purple for the pom-pom up here? Just a little bit. I like it. How about a little bit on the stripe as well? Not too serious. Yeah. Well, Bunny Pen, I think that's it. Retract that. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thanks for hanging out for a minute or so. And yeah, come back again. Like I said, I think the next video is going to be slightly more fantasy related, maybe. And that could be fun. Before I go, though, now you wouldn't necessarily write it like this. You might say soup's on rather than soup is on. But sometimes I just like to put something in its slightly correct way of saying it. All right, folks, that is it. Have a great week. We'll see you again. Ciao for now.